Hello everyone, wishing you a wonderful day. Today we're going to discover a shocking new chapter where Diep finally uncovers the hidden truth behind James's mysterious business trip. Secret debts, late-night phone calls, and a terrifying message saying she knows already slowly push their happy family toward collapse. But who is the mysterious woman connected to James, and why is he so desperate to stop Diep from meeting her? If you enjoy emotional family dramas filled with suspense, hidden secrets, and unexpected twists, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next videos. The rain from the previous night still lingered across the countryside the next morning. Water dripped slowly from the edge of the roof, while grey clouds moved heavily above the narrow dirt road leading into the village. Inside the small wooden house, the atmosphere no longer carried the warmth that had filled it after James returned home. Now, silence had begun replacing comfort. Diep sat alone near the table, holding the transfer papers she discovered inside James's bag only hours earlier. Her eyes remained fixed on the numbers written across the documents, but her thoughts had already drifted somewhere much darker. A large amount of money, multiple transfers, one repeated name, Mr. Duke. Beside her, the house remained quiet, except for the faint sound of rainwater falling outside. James was still asleep in the next room, completely unaware that the secret he had hidden so carefully was no longer hidden anymore. Diep slowly folded the papers again and slipped them back into the bag, exactly where she found them. Her hands still trembled slightly. Part of her wanted to wake James immediately and demand answers, but another part of her was afraid of what those answers might become. A few moments later, small footsteps echoed softly across the wooden floor. Nee appeared, rubbing sleep from her eyes while carrying one of the fairy tale books James bought for her. "Mom," she whispered quietly, "why are you awake so early?" Diep forced herself calm immediately. "Couldn't sleep." Nye climbed onto the chair beside her and opened the picture book excitedly. "Dad, James promised to read this with me today." The innocent happiness in the little girl's voice made Diep's chest tighten painfully. She looked toward the bedroom doorway again. James was still sleeping peacefully. How could someone look so calm while hiding something this serious? A few minutes later, James finally walked into the room, stretching tiredly. His hair looked messy from sleep, but the moment he saw Nee waiting with the book, he smiled warmly. "Already studying this early?" Nye nodded proudly. "You promised." James laughed softly and sat beside her while opening the book. For several quiet minutes, the house almost felt normal again. James read slowly while Nye listened happily beside him. Occasionally, he changed his voice dramatically during funny scenes, making the little girl laugh loudly enough to echo through the room. Diep watched from the kitchen silently, and again, confusion tore through her thoughts. Nothing about James's behavior felt fake. His smile looked real. His affection looked real. Even the exhaustion in his face looked real. So why hide everything? Later that morning, the rain finally weakened into a soft drizzle. James prepared to leave briefly to handle a small work issue in the nearby town. "I won't be long," he told Diep while putting on his jacket. Diep studied him carefully. Work again? James paused slightly before nodding. Just something unfinished from the trip. Again, the answer came too quickly. Diep forced a small nod. All right. Before leaving, James crouched beside Nye and gently fixed her hair. I'll bring you something sweet on the way home. The little girl smiled immediately. Then James grabbed his phone, slipped the bag over his shoulder, and walked outside toward the motorcycle. Diep stood near the doorway, watching him disappear down the muddy road beneath the gray sky. The moment he was gone, silence filled the house again. But this time, the silence felt heavier. Hours passed slowly. Nee eventually fell asleep beside her coloring books, while rain continued tapping softly against the bamboo walls outside. Meanwhile, Diep remained unable to stop thinking about the documents. Finally, unable to ignore the uneasiness any longer, she quietly opened James's bag again. This time, she searched more carefully. Receipts, loan agreements, transfer confirmations. Then suddenly, a folded photograph slipped from one of the side pockets and landed softly on the floor. Diep froze. Slowly, she picked it up. The picture showed James standing beside a woman in the city. The woman looked elegant and unfamiliar, wearing business clothes while holding several documents in her hands. James stood beside her, looking tired but serious. Nothing romantic appeared in the image, and yet something about it immediately disturbed Diep emotionally, because James never mentioned her. On the back of the photograph, one short sentence had been written by hand. "Thank you for helping me through this." No signature, no explanation. Diep stared at the words for several long seconds. Then suddenly, her phone rang loudly beside her. The sound startled her badly enough to nearly drop the photograph. The caller ID showed an unknown number. After hesitating briefly, Diep answered carefully. "Hello." At first, only silence answered her. Then finally, a woman's voice spoke quietly from the other side. "Is this James's wife?" Diep's entire body stiffened instantly. "Yes." Another brief silence followed. Then the woman continued softly, "I think we should talk." The line suddenly disconnected. Diep stared at the phone in shock. Outside, rain continued falling lightly across the empty yard, while cold wind moved through the bamboo fence. Meanwhile, inside the house, the uneasiness inside Diep's chest began growing into something far more dangerous: fear. Later that afternoon, James finally returned home, carrying a small bag of candy for Nye, exactly like he promised. The little girl ran toward him immediately. "You came back!" James laughed and lifted her easily into his arms, but while holding Nye, his eyes slowly lifted toward Diep, and immediately his smile weakened slightly, because he sensed something had changed. "Everything okay?" he asked carefully. Diep looked at him for a moment too long before answering. Why wouldn't it be? James remained silent. The tension between them felt subtle but impossible to ignore. During dinner, conversation became awkward for the first time since James returned from the business trip. Nee continued talking innocently about school and her books, completely unaware of the quiet emotional distance slowly forming between the adults. Several times, James looked toward Diep as though wanting to ask something, but each time he stopped himself. Later that night, after Nee fell asleep, the house became silent once again. James sat outside beneath the roof while smoking quietly in the darkness. Inside the bedroom, Diep stared at the photograph again, beneath the dim yellow light. Her thoughts refused to settle. Who was the woman? Why was James hiding her? And why did the fear inside him seem so real? Then suddenly, James's phone began vibrating loudly inside the bag beside the bed. Diep looked down slowly. The screen lit up brightly in the darkness. One name appeared clearly across the display: Mr. Duke. And before the phone stopped ringing, another message appeared beneath it. She knows already. The message remained glowing on the phone screen for several silent seconds. She knows already. Diep stared at the words, while her heartbeat slowly became louder inside her chest. Outside the bedroom, she could still hear the faint sound of rainwater dripping from the roof where James sat alone, smoking in the darkness. For a moment, Diep considered answering the phone herself, but before she could move, footsteps approached the doorway. Quickly, she placed the phone back exactly where it had been. James entered the room seconds later. The moment his eyes landed on the vibrating phone, something shifted visibly across his expression. Not confusion, fear. He grabbed the phone immediately and checked the message. Then his shoulders tightened. Diep watched him carefully from the bed. Who is Mr. Duke? The question landed heavily between them. James slowly lifted his eyes toward her. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Rain continued tapping softly against the roof outside, while cold wind slipped through the thin bamboo walls surrounding the house. Finally, James forced a calm expression. He's just someone from work. Diep did not look away. You borrowed money from him. James froze again, only briefly, but long enough. I saw the transfer papers, Diep continued quietly. The silence afterward felt unbearable. James rubbed one hand across his face tiredly before sitting down slowly near the edge of the bed. I was going to explain everything. When? Diep asked immediately. After the debt became impossible to hide. James lowered his eyes. The exhaustion in his face suddenly looked deeper than before. It's not what you think. Diep laughed softly under her breath, but there was no humor inside the sound. Then tell me what to think. James remained silent. That silence hurt more than anger would have. For days, Diep kept trying to convince herself there had to be a reasonable explanation behind everything. But now, sitting in front of him, while he continued hiding pieces of the truth, she no longer knew what to believe. Then slowly, she reached beside her and held up the photograph she found earlier. James's expression changed immediately. Who is she? The room fell completely silent. James stared at the picture for several painful seconds before finally answering. Her name is Thao. Diep waited, but James said nothing more. So, she asked sharply. James exhaled heavily. She helped me during the trip. How? Another silence. Then finally, the business project failed. The words landed like cold water across the room. Diep stared at him without speaking. James leaned forward slightly, both hands pressed tightly together. I lost money, he admitted quietly. Much more than I expected. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly across the distant sky. Inside the room, Diep slowly felt the shape of the truth beginning to appear for the first time. James continued speaking carefully. I thought I could fix it before coming home. But you couldn't, Diep whispered. James shook his head slowly. At first, I borrowed money temporarily. Then the project became worse. Diep's eyes lowered toward the transfer papers again. And Mr. Duke? James hesitated. He introduced investors. The answer immediately sounded incomplete. Diep noticed it instantly. That's not the whole story. James closed his eyes briefly. For the first time since returning home, he looked emotionally cornered. Finally, he admitted the part he feared most. I owe him money too. The room suddenly felt smaller around them. How much? James didn't answer immediately. That hesitation alone terrified Diep. How much? She repeated louder. James finally whispered the number. Diep's face lost color instantly. The amount was far beyond anything their small family could recover easily. For several seconds, she genuinely could not breathe. All this time, while he smiled beside Nye, while he taught her to ride the motorcycle, while he laughed during dinner, he had been carrying this alone. Anger rose inside her chest immediately after the shock. You bought a motorcycle while drowning in debt? She asked in disbelief. James looked down. I wanted you and Nye to have something good. Diep stood up suddenly. We didn't need a motorcycle. We needed the truth. Her voice cracked loudly enough to echo through the small house. Outside the bedroom, faint movement suddenly appeared. Nye. The little girl stood near the hallway, holding her blanket nervously after hearing the argument. Both adults froze instantly. James stood up quickly. Nye. But the child looked frightened now. Why are you yelling? The innocence inside her voice shattered the tension for a moment. Diep immediately turned away and wiped her face quickly, before Nee could notice the tears gathering in her eyes. James crouched beside the little girl gently. It's okay, he whispered softly. Mom and Dad James are only talking. Nye studied both of them carefully. Even as a child, she could feel something was wrong. The warmth inside the house had changed. Quietly, she stepped closer and held James's arm. Are you leaving again? The question hit him harder than anything else that night. James immediately shook his head. No. But even while answering, uncertainty still lingered somewhere deep inside his eyes. Later, after finally putting Nye back to sleep, silence returned once more, this time heavier than before. Diep stood outside, beneath the weak rain, near the motorcycle James bought only days earlier. Water dripped slowly from the seat, while wind moved through the dark countryside around her. Behind her, James stepped outside, carefully. For several moments, neither spoke. Then finally, Diep whispered without turning around, Who sent the message tonight? James stopped walking immediately, because now he understood something terrifying. Diep knew more than he thought. Very slowly, she turned and looked directly at him. She knows already, Diep repeated softly. James's face tightened. The woman called me today. Fear crossed his expression instantly. What did she say? She wanted to meet. The rain around them suddenly felt colder. James ran one hand through his wet hair, visibly panicking now for the first time. "You can't meet her." The response came too fast, too emotional, and that reaction alone confirmed Diep's worst fear. Whatever James was hiding had become far bigger than debt alone. After discovering hidden transfer papers and loan documents inside James's bag, Diep begins confronting the painful truth behind his mysterious business trip. Although James continues acting like a loving husband and father, his secret debts connected to a man named Mr. Duke slowly destroy the peace inside their small countryside home. The tension grows even stronger when Diep finds a photograph of James standing beside an unfamiliar woman from the city. Soon after, the same woman secretly calls Diep and asks to meet her in private. During an emotional confrontation, James finally admits that his business project failed and that he borrowed a huge amount of money trying to fix everything alone. However, his fear and desperate reaction after learning about the phone call make Diep realize the situation is far more dangerous than simple financial problems. As rain falls outside their home, trust between them begins collapsing under the weight of hidden truths and unanswered questions.